That's right. We are going to be breaking down, at least for some of the stream, the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian invasion, or the precursor to it, depending on how you want to view things. Obviously, a lot has happened, and I'm hoping that I'm not going to get into the geopolitics, right? Because there's a lot of good sources as to why Putin wants to invade. Right, that's covered extensively, and of course there's lots of video on social media and generally covering what is happening on the ground, right? The pictures, you've seen them probably, of the Russian helicopter formations, tanks and BMPs, all sorts of stuff. But what I hope to do is fill that niche between the big geopolitical strategy, the pretty scary things that are happening to the civilians in the cities, and to help you guys understand the strategies and the thinking at what's called the strategic and operational level of Russia and possibly Ukraine in this conflict. So hopefully, we can have some fun. Of course, if you guys have any questions, you are more than welcome to throw them up in the chat. Max Free, that's yes. Yes, it is. And actually, let's see if I can find, I have a first graphic for you guys. Let me just capture this, because I think there's a lot of conversations around this, and I think some important realities sometimes get missed. Let's see if we can just open this up here. Yeah, that's right. We're gonna view it. Oh, let me view it. I was hoping I could view it in Paint, but I guess not. I'm gonna open with photos. No, of course not. Oh, because it thinks it's video. All right. Well, let's see if we can find it. Let's see. Oh, Max Free, great. Hey, what's going on, Fatals? So, okay. The first thing that needs to happen. Oh, interesting. Da, 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 da. Hello, welcome. Yeah. Welcome, gents. Let's see. So I'm going to actually try to find, there was a nice chart I saw earlier today that I think is really important to getting the, to getting some key context to all of this. And I think it's the reality that you have to start with. Let's see, maybe it's up here. It's a really nice graphic. It shows the estimated, there we go, perfect. There we are. All right, let's take a look at that for starters. I think this is really an important one. Good morning. Yeah, listen. Oh, Dannerell. Yeah, I saw Sean Penn. Oh, thank God. There's one thing I was thinking we needed in all this. It's uninformed hobbyists investing themselves in this, right? I'm, Okay, so here's what I think is some of the most important context. You have to understand, hello, Master of Elements. Okay, is that you have Russia and Ukraine. So in terms of raw troop numbers, you're looking at something that is actually not that one-sided for a defensive fight, right? If you're on defense, the rule is usually you need 3 times, the attacker needs 3 times the defender in order to ensure a swift victory. And that's actually even sort of a rule of thumb. The data is not as clear. You can actually successfully invade a country with far less, or win a battle, rather. So, in terms of tanks, you start to see, in terms of material, that the favor is overwhelmingly to the attackers. Russia has 13,000 tanks, 6,000 pieces of artillery, so it's got twice the active duty military size. But I think this is let's see if I can. Yeah. Let's see. There we go. So it's got about twice the active duty military, but Russia and Ukraine's active duty numbers and their reserves mean different things in different contexts. I think Ukraine, they have things like the Azov Battalion, a sort of national guard that's brought under their fold. Russia has a large reserve element, but I think a lot of those may be conscripts who have finished their service. So it's not quite one-to-one, right? But Russia has a functioning navy. Ukraine has largely a symbolic navy. Russia, of course, has actual warships. Ukraine does not. In terms of attack helicopters, Russia's outnumbering Ukraine 10 to 1 on fighter aircraft and attack aircraft. And, of course, something like 5 or 6 times the air force of Ukraine. It also has what looks like about 7 times the amount of armored vehicles, 6 times the amount of artillery, and 7 to 8 times the amount of armored vehicles. Goblinier, that is what we are here to do. Hopefully try to give you guys a little bit of extra context. The reason we're talking about it is because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we're trying to get a little bit of context. Well, submarines, Badger, are relevant to this conflict because of their ability to launch cruise missiles. They can be another staging site from which cruise missiles can be launched at targets. And so submarines can deter surface warfare vessels that can serve as either staging points for like airborne or marine type operations entering via helicopter. They can also even serve as carriers in the case of Russia. So the existence of a submarine as a defensive mechanism can actually be pretty useful. So the fact that one side has them, the aggressor side has them, and the other side doesn't is a pretty tremendous problem. So, but I think it's really important to understand just how badly outmatched Ukraine is from the start in terms of material, right? Exactly. So, and there's not really a way to quickly scale up material for the Ukraine military, right? Because every tank needs a tank crew member, every tank battalion needs a tank commander, same with artillery, BMPs, you name it. That requires a lot of time and effort to create this level of experience. And the truth is, Russia has invested in this. And even if Ukraine were to suddenly get 10,000 extra armored vehicles, they wouldn't have the logistics or personnel to train and equip them. They would need to have another army enter and crew those vehicles. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how, what it means to actually invade a country. What has to happen? So let's do my Open Office PowerPoint, baby. Yeah, I assume the Azov Battalion probably is either getting shellacked or more likely maybe actually infiltrated by Russian forces who are either sabotaging them. It's just hard. The Azovs are just such a politically and militarily weird animal. But I think they're pretty firmly Ukraine nationalists, but it's tough to say, man. It's been a long time. Right. Man-portable air-to-ground missiles are important, but I think we need to say, let's break down what you need to do to invade a country or to win an operational or win in a theater of war. So let's see if we can insert I'd love a text box here. I'm not really great at this. Maybe this. Is this what I want? No, this is like spell check. I don't want this at all, actually. I lied. I just want a good old-fashioned. There we go. Just a good old text document. Can't lose to a text document. Yeah, MS Paint. That's right, babe. Maybe that's what I need. Anyway, we'll do the text document. Can't go wrong. All right, make this nice and big. Size 12, too small. All right, how to invade a country. By Paul. Okay. Yeah, hey, it's I know what that says. T McGee, thank you for the sub. Okay, it has to happen in 3 phases, right? So, what's the first phase? The first phase is going to be preparation. Preparation. How do we prepare to invade? Now, obviously, there's some things that have to occur long before the invasion takes place. This would be what's sometimes called IPB, or intelligence preparation of the battlefield. And that is things like, where is my enemy located? What is my enemy's strategy? Who is my enemy's leadership? What is the terrain I have to move across? Right? McGee is perfect. Oh, also I realized, let me, the reason you didn't get an alert is because my full screen react. There we go. There it is. Yeah, the reason you didn't get an alert is because my full screen here doesn't quite have the alerts up, but I got you guys. Okay, so IPB is going to be always your first step, and it's always going to be ongoing because, right, the intelligence situation is always changing. But that's something that probably has not stopped happening since about 2014. So we can assume that Russia probably has excellent intelligence preparation of the battlefield. Irava, thanks for the sub, my man. Okay. So what's the next step in invading a country? Next, you have to, of course, marshal your forces. You have to get them into play. Or actually, you need to come up with a battle plan, right? So you need to plan the operation, ideally with 1 N. Okay. You are going to plan. There we go. Right, plan the operation, and then you're going to start your staging. Staging is what we've seen for the past several weeks, where Russian military forces begin to enter what's called their staging areas. And what you didn't see, or wasn't as prominently covered, is, oh yeah, Jade, if you looked back. Oh, thanks for the gifted sub, Iravath. Apologies that you guys aren't getting the alert. Let me see. Let me see if I can drop this in here real quick. Right, browser 2, copy that. We're just gonna paste it right in there. Okay, hopefully now this stuff should show up. Tai Chi, exactly. Okay, so then you have to do the staging. These are what we've seen with moving the tanks, troops, logistics into place. What you didn't see is they probably established things like field hospitals, they established brigade and battalion headquarters, and then they built up also logistics and resupply chains. They figured out how they were going to get everything from Russia, from the main supply depots, to these sort of rear supply areas, right, in Russia on the Ukraine border. Okay. Then, of course, you have to start your process. Thanks for the, there we go. Yep, gifted sub, there we go. Right, you've got to start your staging. Now, once your staging is complete, then you have to start what the phase I think we're in right now. And that is going to be, they're called preparatory. I think they're called preparatory attacks, but we can call them is preliminary attacks, right? This is not the doctrinal term for them, but obviously you can't call them preparatory attacks in the preparation category, right? Preliminary attacks are things that are going to degrade the ability of the defenders to resupply their forces, command their forces, and coordinate their forces. right? That is their goal. Their goal is to diminish the ability of the Ukraine armed forces to ever get to the fight. In the first Gulf War, the U.S. did this to pretty tremendous effect, right? And so there's also, Max, there's also poking the enemy, and that is a different thing that we're going to talk about. Okay, so these preliminary attacks, right, we've seen what they look like. They target, they're going to target, right, they target military centers, military targets, so bases, supply depots. They target infrastructure, the ability, which will give them the ability to move troops to and from areas. Infrastructure. But it's worth noting that Russia needs, for example, roads, bridges. Russia needs roads and bridges for its own forces to enter the country. So it has to be very, very discretionary with what it targets. It also is going to target things like civilian leadership, right? This can include, for example, a parliament building. This can include presidential buildings. Yep. So Chernobyl was probably taken by Russia as a precautionary measure, is my theory. All right. And again, we're going to talk about some of that. So you've obviously got these preliminary attacks, degrade the ability of defenders to resupply, command, and coordinate. Okay. That's what we're seeing with, I think, a lot of these airstrikes, right? These airstrikes, there's also a morale component to some of these large-scale airstrikes, right? So resupply, command, coordinate. We're also going to add in here fight, right? These would be things like diminishing the morale, right? Making troops worry about the home front, whether their families in Kiev are safe. This is going to diminish the civilians' willingness to support a war, right? The idea is to punish civilians, make the war really feel at home. Okay. And so they target military targets, right? They also may target things like power generation. Anything that they think is going to hurt the ability of these forces to communicate, right? Okay. Arrest of the reactors. Oh, hopefully I don't get shut down. Either way, this is hopefully you see this is not me watching war footage. I'm not going to be doing that. I don't think it's morally right, especially because it's ongoing. And yeah, I think when it's too recent, I don't want to be watching it. Exactly, Tai Chi. Yep, Desert Storm and the first Iraq invasion, power stations were huge, just because it was a unsecured linchpin in a lot of infrastructure. Again, something silly, but it's known that Ukraine forces rely heavily on their cell phone communication. And so if you shut down their ability to charge their cell phones, they're one day away from losing one of their main means of communication. Okay, so these are right here, right? These preliminary attacks. These are all the MLRS rockets that we've seen. Let's see if we can find a highlight. Boom, there we go. Okay, so these are all things like airstrikes, the rocket attacks. They may even be, let's see. Yes, Icarus, you're absolutely right. Historically, demoralizing civilian attacks are not really that effective. It tends to galvanize civilians against your target. And it's not clear that Russia is deliberately targeting civilian sites other than those of political or infrastructure significance. But it's not avoiding them either. All right, KSB, I think you're a little early to try to appease, but these are some of these strikes that we're seeing right now. Okay, there's another preliminary type of category of preliminary attack, right? And this is sort of between the main invasion. And I really want this highlighting to stop. Okay, it's between the main invasion. We're still highlighting things, right? You're like, Paul, this is a Word document on a live stream. You don't need to worry that much. No highlighting. Okay. Right? These are between preliminary attacks and a main offensive. And these take a couple of categories. First is seizing key, what we call key terrain, right? Or objectives. Right? There's also feints, and probes. Okay? So, all right, so what is the seizing key terrain and objectives? These are one other thing that we've seen quite a bit is civil infrastructure definitely includes airports. This is why a lot of civilian airports, because every civilian airport can support military aircraft, right? And so as a precaution, they're probably going after their own they're going after Ukrainian air bases for that reason. Move cam to top right. I see what you mean. Good catch. Good catch. Okay. So, right. So we have feints, probes. All right. Seizing key terrain or objectives. What are these? So let's say that Russia wants to make sure it controls airports. I believe there was recently there was actually a CNN video of Russian airborne troops seizing an airport, right? Some airports, Russian military says, we want to make sure we need them operational, so we can't just destroy them with an airstrike because we need to land our troops at this airport and use it to evacuate, for example, our wounded. Okay, so that is going to include, right, key airports you're going to seize, which we're seeing seized by airborne forces. It's going to include sensitive sites, right, like Chernobyl, which I think they are probably seizing because Chernobyl. Good luck, Paul. Right, so we've got Chernobyl because it is a sensitive nuclear site, and Russia does not want to have a nuclear accident either deliberately or accidentally, and so it wants to make sure that it is seized before the Ukrainians can dig in and turn it into an even more intense battle. Wasn't even close. Okay, actually, I was okay. Chernobyl. Bleh. Chernobyl. This is, I don't speak Russian. Right? Chernobyl, other nuclear power plants, right? Yeah, because there is a fear, right? It doesn't seem likely. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't seem very likely that the Ukrainians would be willing to, say, destroy a nuclear power plant to prevent the Russians from getting there. But it is a tactical consideration that an invading country may accidentally or even deliberately sabotage nuclear facilities in order to impede invading forces by, say, irradiating a large area, or just to generally create sort of an embarrassing and humiliating environmental crisis. And so that's why they probably have Chernobyl and other nuclear sites being seized. It's also true that it's possible, but highly unlikely, that a defending force could repurpose, say, spent nuclear fuel into some sort of weapon. Right, so they absolutely are targeting these not for destruction with an airstrike, but to be seized by special forces. All right. Other key terrain that they may want to siege or seize are bridges. Right, bridges are a classic one because it's really hard to well, it's really hard to build a bridge. There's only a handful, even in the US, there's only a handful of units that can do combat bridge building operations, and even they take 4 to 6 hours to get to the front and deploy their bridges. So the Russians have probably identified key bridges that they need to have remain intact for their offensive to succeed. So those are going to be seized by, again, probably airborne troopers, or in the case of a limited advance from like armor, right? Armor will push in for a few kilometers or a few dozen kilometers from the border, from their staging areas, seize this key terrain and just hold it, right? Other key terrain, I think those are the big ones. They are almost always mobility driven ones. But it may also include possibly air defenses are sometimes an example, right? When you cannot destroy the air defenses with your existing air assets. Railways are a great example of key terrain that they would want to potentially seize. Railways that they think Russia can repurpose and use as a resupply line. Obviously, if it's, I want to say most post-Cold War countries have their own railway gauge, and that's not an accident. It's because the Soviets wanted to make sure they could use their railway gauges and Western forces could not repurpose them. Okay. Ports and harbors. Yep. Exactly. Possibly. Sometimes it depends on their larger strategy. Some harbors will probably deliberately have ships sunk in them so that Ukrainians cannot use them. Some harbors will want to be preserved, right? Killjoy. Yep. The pontoon bridges. Exactly. Definitely, they probably have planned on some of their pontoon bridges, but there's not a lot. A radar station, I'm going to say probably not. And that's because Russia is not going to be able to easily repurpose an enemy radar station. Instead, you might have them. Russia probably will bring its own radar in. It may want to preserve air traffic control. Right? They may want to save like air traffic control radar. But that's about it. Okay, so so we've talked about this. These sort of seizing key terrain is going to be done either by what used to be called shock troops. Well, there's always, of course, attacker. Telecommunication, we talked about. That's going to be hit in preparatory attacks, right? Preliminary attacks. And that's because the military, right, the Russian military in this case, is going to have their own telecommunications in-house. So when they destroy telecommunications in Ukraine, they're damaging the Ukrainian military and government's ability to coordinate and be effective. So these are done usually by airborne forces, what the U.S. military calls air assault forces or helicopter-borne troops. Born troops, and it's sometimes done by mechanized forces, right? If it's near-ish to the border, they may just push in and try to seize key terrain that's near the border. And those would probably be like combined forces. Oh yeah, you know what? That's a really good point, Max Free. Part of their preliminary attacks is also, in Russia's case, Russia often uses cyber attacks. And this is to, well, it seems to be like partially a morale, partially diminishing the ability to command and control forces, or even just have communication among defending forces. Right. And let's see. So, all right. So we've talked about that, right? So there's another, obviously what we want to talk about is feints and probes. What is a feint? Okay, so a feint is a deliberate attack, right? Whose purpose is to divert or mislead the defenders. Now, so we've got the right, so we talked a little bit about, right, why they would want to seize and hold this key terrain. And I want to point out that because these are airborne forces, air assault, and mechanized forces that are doing this, that they're on a timeline. Airborne forces cannot hold a location for very long, right? They don't have resupply readily available. So usually these seizing of key terrain and objectives in the preparatory phase is going to be 72 hours or less from the main invasion, right? From the main forces. And that's because those airborne forces need to link up with friendly forces at some point very shortly, right? So the feints are happening concurrently. And these are smaller attacks that look like the, we're going to say vanguard, that look like the beginnings or the tip of the spear of a main advance, right? And so the idea is to either create a boy who cried wolf type situation where Ukrainian military is going to bite at a feint, and they're going to divert their forces to either stop this feint, right? Thinking it's a real attack, and they'll divert a lot of their forces, or at worst, they'll divert some of their forces to right, screen against these attacks. Because if they do nothing, they run the risk of having even a tank battalion, for example, in their backfield, right? And I think these feints are partially I think that Russia's using these feints not really to think that the Ukrainians are going to bite. Ukrainian commanders are experienced. They have been in conflicts for a long time. I don't think so. I think that these are more like probing attacks. And what are probing attacks? Probing attacks are attacks without a specific their attacks. Well, attacks never require you to hold terrain. We're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna use layman's terms. Sorry, my brain keeps wanting to use the military doctrinal term. So, like, a military doctrinal attack does not require you to hold an objective, but most people don't know that. Attacks not to hold territory or objectives, but to discern enemy location and composition, right? And so a probing attack is to see what's there, basically, and to see what's there the hard way, which is by sending your forces in and seeing what they run into. And so it may help tease out what the defender's strategy is, right? If you send a probe and it gets completely wiped out, you say, hey, this may be an enemy strong point. If you send a probe and it encounters barely any resistance, you say, this is not an enemy strong point. And so you may be able to tease out the enemy's larger defensive strategy by using probing attacks, right? Yeah, I'm trying my best not to. If I use a term in a way that seems confusing, let me know. I'll try my best to I'll try my best to straighten it out. So this is what I think the probing attacks, I think, are currently the tank and possibly helicopter attacks. I actually don't think the Russians are going to burn their helicopter, their rotary wing assets, but the tank advances that we've been seeing, I think that's exactly what this is. Okay, the feints, I think, I think what we've been seeing with the tank engagements that have happened, that's what these are. I know, the Daily Mail tends to just love, and the media loves to be like, the 80, they killed 80, they took out 16 tanks. But as we've discussed, 16 tanks is nothing, nothing. It is a trivial rounding error to the Russian military forces because of how big they are. And so that's why I think these are almost certainly probing attacks. Okay. So all this happens. So what happens? You've gathered your intelligence, planned your operations, staged your forces, gotten your troops, logistics, tanks, helicopters, right? You've come up with your plan. You've engaged in your preliminary attacks, degrading the defender's ability to resupply, command, control, coordinate, fight. You've used cyber attacks to amplify and enable your other attacks, right? You've targeted your military targets like bases and supply depots and civilian targets like infrastructure, airports, even civilian leadership, power stations, water, utilities. We've talked about telecom is another great example, right? You've used airstrikes and rocket attacks, and you've begun seizing key terrain within 72 hours of your main invasion. These include operations by your airborne air assault forces or mechanized forces. You hold key airports. You hold extremely sensitive sites like Chernobyl, key bridges, any air defenses that you cannot get your aircraft close to, railways, harbors, anything else you plan on using for your own logistic support. And then you begin to engage in your feints, right, to help try to get the defenders to bite and redirect and divert their forces. And you engage in probing attacks to understand how the defenders are arrayed. Finally, you are ready to begin your main assault, right, your main invasion. And this can come in a couple of directions. Usually there are, 2 or more main thrusts, and these come usually from you want to try to come from at least 2 different directions, right? Because remember, if you're doing it correctly, you want your enemy to be as confused as possible. And if you come from only one direction, it's easy to figure out what's happening. But if you do 2 or more, then it's tough for them to understand what may be just bad information, miscommunications, another feint, right? So you want to have at least 2 different directions, okay? So let's see. Let's look at our friends. All right, supposedly British MOD releases, here we go. Here's the British Ministry of Defense showing Putin's proposed battle plan, which I think actually looks more or less like I talked about. This is my first time seeing it too, but this is precisely what we talked about. So 2 main thrusts, a northern thrust south into Kiev, and a western thrust into and ending on this Dnipro, right? So, what is this going to look like? What it's probably going to look like is a large-scale armored invasion, is what we're seeing, right? In 2 different directions. It will be using fast-moving forces. Almost certainly, it will be what we call mechanized. So mechanized forces. That's going to be tanks as your sort of tip of your spear pushing through, right? And it's going to be supported with dismounted infantry, right? Or actually, I'm sorry, supported with mechanized infantry, right? And that's because the mechanized infantry travel with or behind the tanks in BMPs and troop carrier vehicles, and that when the tanks encounter for example, resistance dug into a town, the supporting infantry will get out and seize the town, clear the enemy, and can allow the tank advance to continue. Dismounts isn't quite right because mech infantry travel mounted and then dismount when needed, Okay. So that's what you are probably likely to see. They will be supported with what we call CCA, or close combat aircraft. And these are going to be either fighters or rotary wing helicopters that will talk directly to forces on the ground, that will call in airstrikes in order to dislodge defenders. Okay. So, right, what is the third step here? So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to move, and they're going to obviously eventually have to seize, right, their key targets. Now, what is the key targets? Oh yeah, CAS, close air support's another example, close combat aircraft, CAS. And this is sort of everyone's question. What is Russia's final objective? Now, this is where we get to phase 3. Okay. What is phase 3? It's consolidate. Now, what does consolidating look like in the conventional sense, right? It's mopping up pockets of resistance. It is going to be repairing, refitting, and assuming a defensive posture in the new territory, right? And so this is a serious question. Repairing, refitting, and assuming a defensive posture in new territory, right? This is going to be driven, this phase 3 is going to be dictated by their eventual objectives. And I think this is where I'm going to speculate a little bit, right? So what do I think Putin's objective is? I think first, so all right, let me show you guys another chart here, and then we will discuss why I think this is so. Let's see. I saw it on Instagram. I'll try to re-find it. Ukraine vote. Yushchenko by territory. What is it? By oblast. Map. Let's see. Beautiful. Perfect. Okay. All right. This is exactly what I want. So, 2010, the Ukrainian presidential election was between the Russian-aligned Viktor Yanukovych and Yulia Tymoshenko, right? And what happened in that election? Well, you can see, like the US, it was a very, very polarized election. And you can see that the Russian-backed candidate basically won these districts here. And the Western-aligned candidate won all of these districts, right? Oblasts, I believe they're called, including every district in Kiev, right? All these cities. And you can see that there's almost no purple states, right? So to speak, purple oblasts. And so if you are Russia and you're Putin, you understand that you understand from Chechnya that a angry and dissatisfied province is tremendously expensive and tremendously politically risky to hold. So, what does that mean? That means you only want to hold territories where the general population broadly wants to be with you, right? They want you on their side. So I predict that Putin will seize Kiev and will force the Ukrainian government to surrender this territory, right? And it will attempt to carve out what it's now going to call probably Western Ukraine or Southern Ukraine, and create the two republics it's recognized with this expanded territory, right? I don't think they're going to want to install a new government in Kiev. That is a lot of work. It probably won't be recognized. And again, frankly, it's a very popular government now more than ever. So I think they just don't want the burden of dealing with all this. And what they ultimately want is a pro-Ukrainian buffer state between them and NATO, right? So this is my theory, that they will seize Ukraine, force concessions, and establish or bolster their independent republics in the western part of the country. Okay. And so what will that look like? That will probably be actually withdrawing their forces, right? So we'll say if the goal is a Western Ukraine Republic, then what we'll see is forced concessions from Kiev. God help me, you guys are really learning about my questionable spelling abilities here. Forced concessions from Kiev. ELT. Eastern. Oh my gosh, what did I called it? Western. Oh, of course. Eastern Ukraine. Yeah. He's even started to sort of use this language in some places where he's referred to it as Eastern Ukraine. Yeah. Whew, buddy. Well, Putin is rational, right? Putin does not want to, he cannot lose another war. And he cannot be bled out, right? He grew up watching the Soviet Union collapse after the Afghan war. So I think he understands. And he actually watched, he came to power off of the failure of Boris Yeltsin, his inability to retake Chechnya. The Chechens actually defeated the Russian army in the first Chechen war. And then when Putin took power, he took back Chechnya, right? And that level of prestige really was a huge boost to his morale. So he understands that you really, really cannot, play these sort of games, right? You cannot run the risk of a long-term bleed you out type of insurgency, excuse me. So I think he's going to force concessions from Kiev, right? Occupy the Western pro-Russian territories, and then withdraw his forces. I think that's what's going to happen, right? And it is, I acknowledge, I could be way off. The other option, if the goal is regime change, it may literally say that he wants to deter other Soviet republics. Eastern. It's a miracle that I can navigate anywhere, honestly. AI space. I may end up putting this video on YouTube to break this down. But yeah, this will get clipped out and put on the clips channel. How's my land nav course? Obviously fine, because I knew where I was going, because a little W would tell me I was going west. Okay, so if the goal is regime change, this is a much, much more ambitious goal, right? So the more ambitious goal for regime change, right? My misspellings and questionable grammar will be permanently affixed to the internet. The other thing, if the goal is regime change, it would involve, seizing and holding Kiev, which is a tall order in and of itself. And then they would have to also seize and hold local capitals, local, provincial or oblast capitals. Right. They don't need the head of state. They just need to install a friendly or we'll call it a pro-Russian government. And then, well, either occupy the territory, or at least until the governance structures are set. And any insurgent movements are eliminated, or contained, They don't need to be eliminated. They just need to be managed. If that's the case, and it's tough to say, right? So, what are the advantages of this Eastern Ukraine Republic? Right? We talked about it. It's easy to hold that territory, right? Advantages. It's easy to hold because it's already pro-Russian. They've actually given out passports for this sort of. Russians have already given out Russian passports to to people in these occupied regions. Right? It's easy to hold. It's manageable. Right, in scale. It's not trying to occupy an entire country with the Russian armed forces. And it's ensures the NATO buffer Putin wants. What are the downsides of this? One, Ukraine remains independent, right? Ukraine continues to fight for its territory back. Other downsides is that, well, I mean, I think those are the two biggest ones, right? Is that Ukraine remains independent. It's going to continue to fight for its country back. It only has limited deterrence to other potential and we'll call them Eastern European NATO aspirants. Does that make sense? Right? Because they're going to look and they're going to say, listen, Russia invaded Ukraine, sure, but it didn't change the regime. The regime remained intact. Right? If the goal is regime change, right, the advantages are a larger security buffer, right, against NATO, a powerful deterrence for other European aligning Eastern European countries, Oh, yield T. Look earlier in the stream. We broke down, or we took a look at Ukraine's military versus Russia. It's not good. Yeah, Russia has 3 to 10 times, as many aircraft, tanks, fighter jets, etc., and around twice as many military. No, Norway is a tremendous NATO ally. Right. And it, like, Putin will not attack a NATO country because he is literally attacking Ukraine to stop it from becoming a NATO country. That's how afraid he is of embroiling himself in a conflict with NATO. Right. Let me see if I can pull up another infographic just to, let's see if we can find a nice infographic about NATO and Russia. There we go. Here's a good one. Let's see. Let's see if I can find a higher res version of this. There we go. Perfect. All right, here, take a look at this, guys. This is probably pretty good. Okay, this is NATO and Russia. NATO, in contrast, is bringing 3.8 million active troops. Right? Russia, as discussed, can muster 1 million if it calls in its reserves. Okay. In the right, you also, of course, this is just the UK alone. Yep, NATO 22 nuclear armed submarines to Russia's 12. Russia's combat aircraft, right? We saw it's about 1,300 now. NATO 4 times as many. Again, a significantly, 4 times as many main battle tanks, 13 aircraft carriers, armored infantry fighting vehicles, double what Russia is bringing to the fight. So the lesson here is clear. Almost as much as Russia dominates Ukraine, NATO dominates Russia. Okay, so it won't take much. It won't take much for Putin's fear of NATO is real, because they would be able to. It wouldn't be easy, but especially if you were trying to just get Russia out of Ukraine territory, it would be a very challenging run. Okay, so the advantages of regime change, right? Larger security buffer, deterrence for other European aligning countries, and greater access to Ukraine's economic outputs, right? I guess this is also worth noting. The goal is regime change. If the goal is manageable scale, one of the downsides is, of course, that smaller, weaker economic allies. The truth is, the independent republics of Western Ukraine are economically really poor. I think they're kind of Ukraine's version of the Rust Belt. It's sort of like if someone was to carve out like Cleveland and Dayton from the U.S., right? Like Cleveland, Dayton up to Detroit. Like it would be mad. It would be bad because they're like, this is America, but it's not the same thing as carving out L.A., New York, or San Francisco, right? The economy wouldn't take that big a hit. Okay. So it would give them a greater economic partner in the seized Ukraine. Okay. What about the disadvantages? And I think they are significant. First off, it means that that Russia will have to occupy large hostile territories. This is a huge downside, massive downside, right? The disadvantages would almost certainly outweigh the advantages because it is so expensive. Even if it's a low-grade insurgency, the fact is that if it has broad popular support and it has a adequately supplied group, and the fact that it can work out of a NATO ally who Russia will not touch, i.e. Poland, Romania, or other NATO allies, right? This is sort of the U.S. problem in Pakistan, right? It couldn't... oh no, where is my... I don't have my water bottle. This is problematic. Yeah, they would have to occupy large and hostile territories. Who would, like the U.S. and Pakistan, right? The Taliban were able to have relative safe harbor in Pakistan because the U.S. couldn't violate Pakistani sovereignty. Well, a Ukrainian insurgency would have even more traction operating out of somewhere like Poland or Romania. Yeah, exactly. So, right, Russia will have to occupy large territories where the general populace is hostile. The international community will be even more furious, and I think these are probably the two biggest disadvantages, but it's just a massive disadvantage in manpower and resources, right? It'll cost far, far more. I know, Nornet. I don't know what I did with my water bottle, frankly. I might have to go get it. Okay, I'm gonna drink. Maybe I'll fill my mug with water. So yeah. I think this is the best summary that I can think of for how this invasion will play out. If I had to guess, I would say this is the goal, right? This is the goal. And overall, yeah. Do you guys have any questions on this? About what you think might happen, or any input you want from me on what you've read on the news or seen? Right, Rindred, I've also seen that there's a lot of recycled footage from 2014 being used with different captions for clicks, and it's really tough. This is just a tough environment to discern things from, because Russia very deliberately is trying to shut off communication with the outside. They don't want their troops' actual movements to get out, and so they're making it very, very tough to do. Okay. Let's see. All right, let's talk. Okay. In your opinion, could the use of CCTV and public live streams of the footage be a factor in attacks and defenses? Yes, I have heard that. Yeah, if you're putting out publicly footage of attacker positions or defenders positions, and you're able to timestamp that and verify it, then yes, the defenders, the attackers, intelligence agencies could definitely use that as a factor. I think the more likely things you will see would be if you can, if you could somehow start to scoop up cell phone tower data. If you knew that the defenders were, you could figure out their positions if you could identify their cell phones, and then scoop that data up wholesale. You could find areas where they are especially concentrated, and you could discern the defenses that way. So I think things like social media and footage metadata is going to be actually much more of a factor than live streams or CCTV. The benefits worth the costs. Ultimately, this is why people hope that sanctions will have an effect. I don't think they will, because of the way power in Russia is consolidated with ultra wealthy individuals, that it's sort of like being like punishing Jeff Bezos by being like, we're going to take half your money. Jeff Bezos will be upset, but his lifestyle will not change. Amazon employees would get totally hammered, right? They would get screwed, but Jeff Bezos's day-to-day lifestyle would not change in any meaningful way. So I don't think so. The benefits, I think, are made up. I think Putin believes NATO is a threat to Russia, but like, I think he miscalculated. In the 90s, there was talk about Russia becoming a NATO member, right? NATO was open to that idea sincerely. And I think Russia and Putin just instinctively was like, no, there's no way. Like, NATO hates us, and NATO wants to peel away all of our former allies. And I think that paradigm is too strong. And I think he sees threats where there really aren't any. But, you know, yeah, again, I mean, look at NATO. Yeah, NATO, it was unlikely to actually hostily attack Russia. There's no reason. Russia economically, NATO could care less. Russia has an economy the size of Belgium. And other than its nuclear weapons that it said it won't use, like the nuclear deterrent is powerful enough to keep any NATO troops off of Russian shores. Okay. What are the panzers moving up from Crimea? And I'm not familiar with Shorad defenses. Let's see. Slotty Hamster, China. The U.S. would probably be aware if there was a buildup of China in Taiwan or across the Formosa. The U.S. would be cognizant of something like that. And it would take about as long as it took Russia to marshal its ground forces. And Russia is a very veteran military, and it's very, very organized. China would have a tougher time. Its military is still sort of logistically figuring out how to do conventional military operations. Let's see. Is there a reason why the Ukrainian MOD has images of their troops videos? Because locations, yes, Mackerel Dude, you've hit it spot on. It's called OPSEC, or Operational Security. And Ukrainian forces don't want their defenders' positions or troop movements to be given away. Even pretty innocuous footage can still be used to reveal information about where those troops are. For example, if you can see a street sign and a unit patch in a photo, you can identify which unit is in what location. The Russian economy has borne a lot of sanctions already. And so I actually question the efficacy of sanctions, also because Russia is very proficient at circumnavigating sanctions. And there's always someone somewhere willing to help Russians and Russian oligarchs work around sanctions. And I think the Russians also believe that they can get an amenable party to power in the U.S., a more Russia-friendly party. And so I think if they're confident of that, they believe that with the right push, they could have the U.S. adopt a much more amenable stance towards Russian activity, including sanctions. The U.S. going after Russia's internet. Okay. Seems possible. I haven't heard anything on that. Stream of many cities were hit with DDoS and cyber attacks. That makes sense. It's not clear. I'd be curious to know where the DDoS and cyber attacks were targeted, if it was just a general one or a not. Am I surprised by the rapid advance of the Russians? I don't believe the main advance has happened yet. I am not surprised that Russian preliminary targets or preliminary operations have been as effective as they are. No, this doesn't surprise me at all. Russian troops have gained a lot of experience in places like Syria and the DRC. They have a decent amount of experience. They're very, very mobile, and they're a ground force, and they are doing a ground operation. They also just have numbers. They have such a tremendous numerical advantage. But no, I don't think we've seen the main advance yet. I think the thought that this is the main invasion is incorrect. We are probably could be as little as 6 and as many as 48 hours from now. Let's see. No, remember, I don't think, are there tanks surrounding Kiev? I haven't seen anything. I've seen airborne troops seizing targets in Kiev, and I've seen airstrikes on Kiev, but I am not aware of ground troops. Can I check Live View map? Is that a map of Ukraine? Universal awareness map. Live view map. Ukraine. Nope, it's DDoSed. Hold offline. Okay. If anything, all right. I'm like short range air defenses. No, I think any short range air defenses are just a precaution. Yeah, Putin also be. People are expecting Kiev to fall in less than 24 hours. Yeah, it's not clear. Yeah. Again, this is not the main advance. I really don't think it is. If it is happening, then it hasn't hit the news wires yet that I've seen. How likely is and effective is it to sabotage Ukrainians' nuclear power plants? 0. It would be a disaster for either side if that were to happen. Yeah, the fear that I think Russia has is that a desperate and falling Ukraine government would order its nuclear power plants like scuttled, but it would burn so much goodwill with NATO that Ukraine probably realizes that it's a really bad idea. Also because like destroying a nuclear power plant will blow irradiated a cloud of radiation into Western Europe, Ukraine's chief allies. If Ukraine falls, will the people try and revolt? It depends. We talked about that. If the goal is regime change, I think the answer is probably. If the goal is just to create a pro-Russian separatist state in the West, probably not. But the Ukraine government will continue to fight to try to get its territory back, obviously. Yeah, I'd be curious to know. Talk to an economist to speak on the sanctions. Do I think Ukraine has a chance of holding the Russian army long enough or causing enough damage to bring Russia to the negotiation table? The short answer is no, not in this main body kinetic push. It just doesn't. I think they may account for themselves well, but they won't be able to stop Russia. Even if every tank, plane, and soldier in Ukraine was to be twice as effective as their Russian equivalents, it still wouldn't be enough to stop the advance. Yeah, Tai Chi, exactly. We looked up this map. It's been cyber attacked. It's been DDoSed. Yeah, targeting the parliament and economic sector. We talked about that as a preliminary attack to degrade their ability to command and coordinate. Do you think that a test from communist countries? Well, Russia is not a communist country. I think that's a really important distinction, and it doesn't aspire to be. Yep. Do you test communist countries? I don't think so. I really don't think. Oh, okay. So there are tanks around Kiev already. I haven't seen this. Yeah, the closest troops got to Kiev was a VDV telecom. Yeah, that was my understanding. Okay. Yeah, China may allow Russian forces or Russian oligarchs to circumvent sanctions. I could see that happening. Yeah, these airport attacks. Sorry, I'm trying to work through your questions. Okay, what are Ukraine's priorities of defense? Okay, it's going to be probably to raise the costs of the invasion to the point where they are unsustainable for Russia. What? Yeah, that's going to be their goal. And to do that, they cannot fight the Russian forces in the open. They have to do it in cities. Since Russia probably does not want to glass a city, though it could, they will have to take it back building by building. And so that is what I think is their bet, is to just force all of these urban fights and just grind down the Russian war machine to the point where it's such a slog and so costly that, especially when it gets into territories which are not pro-Russian, then it will become just incredibly, tremendously difficult. That, I think, is their best strategy. Again, Putin is willing to take a lot of casualties to make this happen, but the Russian military can also be pretty ponderous sometimes. And so I think it's not unrealistic to hope to be able to do that. Yep. Tai Chi. In agreement. Yeah, they were willing to really mess up Grozny. Yeah, and here's the thing. To clear and hold a city takes a lot of people. And you can't really continue your advance if a city around you is still hostile. City to your rear is still hostile. So I think those are the biggest fears that people have. Beal, you got to rewind in the live stream, man. You can see we're like 300 words of my PowerPoint in. So yeah, no one wins. Yeah. No, it's true. There is a morale factor. I mean, in Chechnya, the morale factor, right, really ground down Russian conscripts. And some of these Russians do look like, kind of conscripts. Right, definitely their VDV, their airborne troopers in the airports, definitely highly professional, definitely look like they have their act together, but some of the tankers and regular troops seem less so. Yep. Again, Tai Chi, I think you're right. The standard Soviet playbook actually says to bypass cities entirely, but it may not be applicable because it would be, one, you kind of have to. You need large roadways to advance a mechanized force. And it's also, you just can't leave a city behind. There's too much damage that an undefeated force can do. Yeah. What is the international response? I am actually surprised at the disorganization and lack of decisive international response. Right? I mean, Russia engaged in a pretty wildly brazen level of interference in the U.S. election. It's not clear how much more sanctions-wise the U.S. has in the bag. It's not clear that Europe has the stomach to target Russia's most profitable industries, its oil and gas industry. And it's not clear what else there is. They still have access to the SWIFT system for international money movements. Yeah, it's problematic. I worry how much punishing you can do to a country like Russia still, and we don't seem to have done any of it. We being NATO, the West generally. SWIFT AI is a system of international payments across banks. All banks have a SWIFT code that allows money to be moved from bank to bank across countries. It's meant to be done very quickly and efficiently, but it's an international banking system. So it's if you want to sanction somebody and freeze their money in their country, that's an easy way to do it, right? Okay, the Russians made a deliberate effort to interfere, definitely in the 2016 election. Almost certainly they attempted to engage in some level of propagandizing in the 2020 election. And the U.S. definitely, the U.S. needed to respond in kind, and it didn't. Regardless of who wins our elections are ours to run and execute. Having Russia create fake Facebook groups or push narratives via social media. I think there was a lot more that went on that wasn't reported or detected. Russia is a very sophisticated information operation machine. I think a lot of the things, if you read something that seems comically extreme, I think Russia or other nefarious actors, they may not create it, but if Russia's smart, they will use bots to exploit the algorithm to amplify it. They'll find the most extreme voices within the US, and they will amplify those voices in order to polarize and create a much more emotionally worked up, angrier, more outraged society, and it's less likely to be able to do things like stop this, right? Because the society can't work together if it's so polarized. Let's see. Will the document be available for download? I guess I can clean it up. This isn't really. I don't know if I want to distribute How to Invade a Country by Paul. I don't know if that'll put me on a list. I may actually not. Do you? Yeah. I don't know. The answer is maybe. Let me sleep on it. If I do, I'll put a link to it in the description of the YouTube video. It'll be on the Clips channel. Yeah, welcome to the watches. How to Invade a Country by Paul. That, in retrospect, putting my name on it. Yeah. Maybe put it. Oh yeah, maybe in the Discord. Yeah, you're right. This is the least crazy thing in the Discord. So, yeah, I should try to clean it up maybe. Okay, I'll throw it in the Discord. All right. Changing it to Paulina. Got him. Just add how to defend. Yeah. Well, listen, all this is just analysis. Okay, so what I think I'm actually going to do. Oh wow, we're at an hour and 25. Man. Okay. Yeah, Art of War. Yes, indeed. I actually did write a couple of pieces for a fairly well-known defense blog, several well-known defense-like websites. So, yeah. I actually once wrote for the Wall Street Journal, believe it or not, just like an op-ed on national security stuff. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. Tai Chi, not anymore. Not anymore. But I can't say more than that. Will this be on the test? The test is actually a Russian invasion, so possibly. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do, is there any other questions, right? Because what I'm probably going to do is actually pause after this. If I've got all the questions, save this document. I'm going to pause and probably hop off stream, get some water, and then hop back on, and we'll play some Tarkov. Russia paid off the examiners. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll definitely do an update, man. This has been How to Survive Grads Vaporizing Your Grid Square. Don't be in the grid square. I do need a BRB screen. Playing Kiev. That hurts my soul. Do I think Mosin joined the Russian military? Mosin seems like the kind of guy who definitely served in the military and then got out, became a morphine addict, took a contract with Wagner Group when it kind of became degenerates. All right, see you guys. Yeah, Tarkov does seem appropriate. Let's see. Being a chair stream. Yeah, basically. Mosin was probably part of some sort of militia. Yeah. All right, so let's see. How do I get a BRB screen? Okay. Escape from Kiev. All right. This is digressing into a level of darkness that I don't know if I want to be a part of. Okay, so we're gonna hit pause. I'm going to be back and we're going to play some Tarkov. I hope you guys stick around. If you enjoyed this, I can stream tomorrow and we can do a Battlefield update. And yeah, thanks again. Yeah, I'll see you guys in a bit.
No, it was supposed to be my pentakill. Why did you do that to me? I killed, I know, want to